You don't realize how bad it's about to get this fall. And I mean this fall specifically. Not next year, not someday, not in a vague future you can push to the back of your mind while you finish the summer. Because there is a reason the people who build spreadsheets for a living, while the ones who model household budgets and consumer spending and default rates for banks and insurers, have quietly started circling the months of September, October, and November on their calendars with the kind of attention they usually reserve for a coming storm. It is not one thing. It never is. It is the way a dozen separate pressures, each one survivable on its own, have been scheduled, whether by accident or design, to land on the same American household in the same narrow stretch of weeks, right as the days get shorter and the heating bill wakes back up and the holidays arrive demanding money. Nobody has. You have felt the summer stretch your budget thinner than any summer you can remember. And I need you to understand, before the leaves even turn, that the summer was the easy part. What is coming when the weather changes has already been written into the calendar, and almost nobody is warning you. Let's get into it. The wage garnishment machine that has been dormant since 2020 roars fully back to life this fall, and 5.5 million Americans are about to watch up to 15% of every paycheck vanish before it ever reaches their bank account, whether they can afford to lose it or not. Picture the paycheck you are counting on this October, the one you have already spent in your head on the electric bill, and the groceries and whatever the kids need for school, and now imagine 15% of it gone before it ever touches your account, seized automatically, without a court hearing, without your permission, without any regard for whether the remaining 85% covers your rent. For 5.5 million Americans currently in default on their federal student loans, that is not a hypothetical. It is a scheduled event, and the schedule accelerates through the exact months this video is warning you about. The wage garnishment machine, dormant since March 2020, when the pandemic froze federal collections, has been switched back on, and after a series of delays, it is ramping through 2026 on a monthly escalation, with the Department of Education confirming that garnishment notices began going out in batches and increase in volume month over month, meaning the number of Americans watching their wages seized grows larger every single month as fall approaches. And the mechanism is brutal in a way most people do not understand until it happens to them. Because administrative wage garnishment allows the government to withhold up to 15% of your pay, and it does not stop there. It can seize your tax refund. It can garnish your Social Security benefits, which means retirees living on fixed incomes are not exempt from this. The Institute of Student Loan Advisors put it plainly, warning that if you think you cannot afford your payments now, wait until you see how unaffordable it becomes once they start garnishing. Because the amount they take is very often larger than the monthly payment would have been in the first place. And the total exposure is staggering, because roughly 9.2 million borrowers in default are being moved into a collection system, now run through the Treasury Department, and less than 40% of all federal borrowers are even current on their payments at all, meaning the pool of people who could be pulled into garnishment is vastly larger than the 5.5 million already in the crosshairs. And here is the timing detail that should genuinely unsettle you. The student loan advisors themselves noted that this garnishment wave is landing at precisely the same moment that health insurance premiums are spiking for these exact same low and middle income borrowers, meaning the two forces are converging on the same wallet in the same season. You are not just losing 15% of your paycheck this fall, you are losing it in the exact months when everything else you owe is scheduled to get more expensive at the same time. The holiday season that is supposed to be the warmest stretch of the year is about to become the most financially violent, because Americans are walking into it already carrying a record $1.2 trillion in credit card debt, and this fall they will borrow against a card that is already maxed to pretend the holidays are normal. Something quietly dark happens to the American budget every autumn, and this year it is going to happen to a population that has no cushion left to absorb it. The holidays arrive, and with them the unspoken social obligation to spend on gifts, on travel, on the meal, on the appearance that everything is fine for the sake of the children and the relatives and the version of yourself you present at the table. And Americans, who are entering this fall already buried under a record-shattering $1.2 trillion in credit card debt at an average interest rate hovering near 24%, are going to do what they do every year, except with far less room to do it. They are going to reach for the credit card. Except this year, for tens of millions of them, that card is already close to its limit. Which means the holiday spending does not just add debt, it pushes balances into the zone where the minimum payment alone becomes unmanageable, and the 24% interest begins compounding on a balance that will not be paid off for years, if ever. And this is happening against a backdrop that makes it far more dangerous than a normal year, because 111 million Americans already cannot pay their credit card bill in full each month, and the savings rate has cratered to around 4%, meaning the average household has almost nothing set aside to fall back on when the January statement arrives carrying the weight of December. The retail data confirms the trap is already being set, because buy now, pay later services, the ones that let you split a purchase into 4 payments with a click, have exploded in usage precisely because people can no longer afford the things they are buying up front, and defaults on those services have been climbing as borrowers stack multiple simultaneous payment plans they cannot collectively afford, a phenomenon analysts have started calling phantom debt because much of it does not even show up on traditional credit reports until it is already too late. And layer onto that the fact that this fall arrives with student loan garnishments seizing paychecks, health premiums doubling, heating bills waking back up, and a labor market shedding jobs across every sector. And you have a holiday season where millions of families will borrow money they cannot repay at interest rates that guarantee they never will to fund a few weeks of manufactured normalcy and then walk into the new year owing more than they have ever owed in their lives. At the exact moment, every other bill in this video comes due at once. The single largest anti-hunger program in American history is being gutted by the deepest cut it has ever absorbed. And this fall, as the recertification letters go out, roughly 4 million people are scheduled to lose some or all of their food assistance right as Thanksgiving arrives. Think about the timing of this for a moment, because the cruelty of the timing is the part almost nobody is connecting. SNAP, the program formerly known as food stamps, feeds tens of millions of Americans, and it is currently absorbing the single largest cut in its 60-year history, a reduction of roughly $186 billion over the next decade, which Harvard Kennedy School described as a 20% cut that marks the largest reduction the program has ever seen. And the way these cuts actually reach a family is not through one dramatic announcement. It reaches them through the recertification letter, the routine paperwork that every SNAP household must complete every 6 or 12 months to prove they still qualify. And this fall is when a massive wave of those recertifications comes due under brutal new rules. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act expanded the work requirement to cover, for the very first time, adults aged 55 through 64 and parents with children as young as 14, while stripping away the exemptions that had protected veterans, homeless individuals, and young people aging out of foster care. And the Congressional Budget Office estimates that roughly 4 million people in a typical month will lose some or all of their benefits once these changes fully take hold. This is not a projection about some distant year. It is already happening because PBS reported that between July 2025 and February 2026, in just 6 months, 3.5 million people had already lost access, led by Arizona, where SNAP participation collapsed by 51%, half the state's recipients gone. And the fall is when it accelerates, because that is when the recertification wave crests and the holiday season lands on top of it simultaneously. Harvard's Sarah Bleich named the impossible arithmetic families are now facing, that they will have to choose between paying rent, paying for food, and paying medical bills all at once, right as Thanksgiving arrives. And here is the collapse behind the collapse, the detail that removes the last safety net most people assume will catch them. For every single meal a food bank provides in this country, SNAP provides 9 to 1, which means when the government pulls SNAP out from under 4 million people, the charitable food sector that everyone assumes will absorb the overflow has the capacity to replace only a fraction of what was lost, and the food bank lines, already stretching longer by the week, are about to face a surge of demand this fall that no charity in America has the capacity to fill. The heating assistance that keeps roughly 6 million low-income households from freezing through the winter has been quietly sabotaged from the inside, because the administration fired the federal workers who run it, and the money now arrives too late in the season to matter. Cold weather does not wait for bureaucracy, and that is exactly the vulnerability that has been exploited this year. LIHEAP, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, is a $4.1 billion lifeline that helps nearly 6 million low-income households cover their heating costs during winter. And Republican Congressman Tim Burchett himself called it a life-or-death issue, warning that vulnerable Americans, especially seniors, face freezing conditions without it. But here is what almost no one watching their thermostat this fall understands about the machinery behind that program. The administration eliminated the federal oversight staff who actually administer LIHEAP ETUHAP earlier this year, gutting the human infrastructure that processes the applications and releases the funds, which means that even when the money technically exists, the people who move it out the door to freezing families are gone. And the timing of the disbursement is the quiet killer. LIHEAP funding is normally released at the beginning of November, right as the cold sets in. But when that release gets delayed, whether by a shutdown, by staffing collapse, or by administrative dysfunction, states keep their winter applications closed, and families who need help heating their homes in November are told they may not see assistance until December, or later, after the coldest, most dangerous weeks have already passed. The Nation documented a single mother of 3 in Pennsylvania named Tamaris King, who relies on LI-HEAP for her heat, describing the situation in one word: devastating, as she was forced to turn on the heat she could not afford to pay for and delay her utility bills as long as she possibly could. And this is landing on top of a new SNAP rule that makes it worse in a way that connects the two crises directly. Because the mega bill restricted the long-standing simplification that let households receiving LI-HEAP automatically qualify for SNAP's higher utility allowance, meaning families now lose food benefits and heating help in the same policy stroke. So picture the household this fall. The heating bill wakes up as the temperature drops. The assistance that used to blunt it is delayed, understaffed, or gone. The food benefit tied to it shrinks at the same time, and the family sits in a house they are afraid to heat, rationing warmth the way they are already rationing food, in the wealthiest country that has ever existed, because the people whose job was to prevent exactly this were fired before the cold arrived. The companies that cut jobs all year have been waiting for a specific moment to do the deepest round, and that moment is the fourth quarter, because layoffs announced in autumn let a corporation clean up its balance sheet before the annual report and hand shareholders a leaner company for the new year, right as you are least able to absorb it. There is a rhythm to corporate layoffs that most workers never learn until they are caught inside it, and that rhythm peaks in the fall. Companies operate on a fiscal calendar, and the fourth quarter, October through December, is when leadership finalizes the numbers they will report to shareholders and sets the cost structure they want to carry into the new year. A workforce reduction booked in the fall lets a company absorb the severance charge in the current year, start the following January leaner and more profitable on paper, and hand Wall Street a story about discipline and efficiency right when annual guidance is issued. Which means the layoffs you have watched roll through every sector all year are not finished. The heaviest, most strategically timed round is historically the autumn round, and it is arriving into a labor market that is already the weakest it has been outside of a formal recession. Job growth has collapsed to roughly 17,000 positions a month, a level Brookings warns historically signals a labor market already in crisis, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics issued a staggering downward revision of over 900,000 jobs to prior figures, meaning the market was quietly far weaker for months than anyone realized in real time. Challenger, Gray & Christmas, the firm that has tracked layoffs since 1993, documented job cut announcements running dramatically above prior year levels, with AI-driven restructuring, federal workforce reductions, and tariff pressure all converging at once, and 58% of companies signaling more cuts still to come. And here is why the fall timing turns a bad situation into a devastating one for the individual worker. A layoff in October or November does not just cost you the job, it costs you the job at the exact moment the holidays demand spending you cannot do. The heating bill spikes, the credit card is already maxed, and the hiring freeze that grips almost every company during the fourth quarter means there is nowhere to land, because companies do not onboard new employees in December. They wait until the new year. So the autumn layoff drops you into a 2 to 3 month dead zone where nobody is hiring. Every bill is peaking, and the severance, if you even get any, evaporates against a season engineered to extract every dollar you have. The people who model these decisions know exactly what quarter they are choosing. They are choosing the one where it hurts you the most and helps their balance sheet the most, and those two things are the same quarter for a reason. Open enrollment opens November 1st, and when roughly 24 million Americans log in to renew the health insurance they have relied on for years, they are going to see a number on the screen that more than doubles what they paid last year, and millions of them are going to click away uninsured. Mark the date, because it is the single most consequential financial event of the fall for more than 24 million households, and almost nobody outside of health policy circles is bracing for it. On November 1st, ACA open enrollment opens, and for the first time in years, the enhanced premium tax credits that made marketplace coverage affordable for the middle class are gone, expired at the end of 2025, after Congress left for its holiday recess without a deal. And the moment enrollees log in to renew, the screen shows them a number KFF projects will more than double, a 114% average increase, more than $1,000 more per year for the exact same plan they held last year. This is not an abstraction. The Center for American Progress ran the real numbers using state window shopping tools. A couple in their early 50s in Roanoke, Virginia, earning $85,000, watches their premium climb from $602 a month to $1,410, a 134% jump. A family of 4 in Rockland County, New York, earning $105,000, sees their monthly premium rise from $1,809 to $3,101. These are not poverty-level households. These are working families, small business owners, the self-employed, who make up roughly 1 in 4 marketplace enrollees, and they are being priced directly out of the coverage that stood between them and medical bankruptcy. And the exodus is already measurable. KFF found that effectuated enrollment could collapse from 22.3 million people in 2025 to as low as 16.5 million in 2026, a loss of nearly 6 million insured Americans, and in states like North Carolina, signups already fell nearly 22%. Health economists have a specific chilling term for what happens next: a death spiral. When the healthy people flee the higher prices, the risk pool that remains is older and sicker, which forces premiums even higher, which drives more healthy people out in a self-reinforcing collapse. And the cruelest mechanic of all is the timing overlap, because open enrollment runs November 1st through mid-December, landing squarely on top of the holiday spending, the heating bills, the SNAP cuts, and the student loan garnishments, forcing families to choose, in the same few weeks, between ensuring their health and affording their winter. Millions will choose to go uninsured, gambling that they simply will not get sick in the coldest, most illness-prone season of the year. The grocery bill that already made you wince all summer is about to get its worst shock of the year, because the fall harvest was planted under drought and deportation and fertilizer costs that never recovered. And the holiday table you are planning is going to cost more than any holiday table in American history. Everything about the food on your table this fall was decided months ago, in fields you never saw, under conditions almost no one reported on, and the result is arriving at your grocery store just in time for the holidays. Start with the growing season itself, because the crops being harvested right now were planted into a brutal set of conditions, with drought conditions gripping enormous stretches of American farmland, fertilizer costs that spiked during the Iran war and never came back down, and an agricultural labor force gutted by aggressive deportation policy that left crops unpicked and yields diminished across the country. Food prices have already climbed more than 25% since 2020, and the tomato alone jumped 40% in a single recent year. And the fall harvest arriving under these degraded conditions means the relief that a good harvest normally brings to autumn grocery prices is simply not coming this year. And here is where the fall timing turns a chronic problem into an acute one, because the holiday season is when food demand peaks, when families buy the turkey and the ham and the ingredients for meals they only make once a year, and they are walking into that peak demand window with prices already at record highs and climbing. The classic holiday grocery basket, already the most expensive it has ever been, lands on households that just lost SNAP benefits, are watching their paychecks get garnished, and are staring at a health premium that doubled. And the shrinkflation compounds the insult invisibly, because the package that looks the same size holds less than it did last year. The 18-ounce box that is now 15, the half-gallon that is now 48 ounces, so the family paying more is also getting less without even seeing it happen. USDA projections show food prices continuing to climb another several percentage points through the end of the year, on top of everything already stacked. And the food banks that families would normally turn to when the grocery bill becomes impossible are the same food banks already overwhelmed by the SNAP collapse, already facing lines stretching around the block, already unable to provide more than a fraction of what the government just stopped providing. So the holiday table this fall becomes a kind of quiet reckoning, where families sit down to a meal that cost more than any generation before them ever paid, purchased with money they do not have, in a season that used to be about abundance and is quietly becoming about rationing. Take every single thread in this video and lay their dates side by side on one calendar, and you will see the thing the institutions publishing these warnings never show you, because each one only reports its own piece. Every one of them detonates in the same 90 days, on the same households, at the same time. Here is the exercise no economist, no agency, no news outlet will do for you, because each of them is responsible for only one slice of the picture, and none of them is required to connect their slice to the one sitting on the desk beside it. But you do not live in slices. You live on one calendar, paying every one of these bills out of one paycheck, and when you actually lay the fall timeline out end to end, the pattern that emerges is not a series of separate hardships. It is a single coordinated detonation. In October, the student loan garnishment machine escalates, seizing up to 15% of paychecks from a pool of borrowers that grows every month. On November 1st, ACA open enrollment opens, and 24 million people see premiums that have doubled, with millions poised to drop coverage entirely. Also in November, The LIHEAP heating assistance that keeps 6 million households from freezing is delayed, understaffed, or gone, right as the temperature drops. Through the fall, the SNAP recertification wave crests, stripping food benefits from up to 4 million people as Thanksgiving arrives, and the food banks that would catch them buckle under 9-to-1 demand they cannot meet. The fourth quarter layoff round, the deepest and most strategically timed of the year, drops workers into a hiring freeze where nobody onboards until January. The holiday season detonates a record $1.2 trillion in credit card debt at 24% interest across households with no savings left. And the grocery bill, already at record highs, spikes into its peak demand holiday window on a harvest degraded by drought, deportation, and fertilizer costs. Every one of these has a date. Every one of those dates falls in the same 90-day window. And not a single one of them was coordinated by any master planner in any single room, which is precisely what should terrify you, because a coordinated attack can be negotiated with, exposed, or stopped. This is worse. This is dozens of separate decisions, made by separate people in separate rooms, none of whom were ever required to ask what happens when all of their individual choices land on the same exhausted American family in the same 3 months. Nobody asked that question. And now the answer is arriving. This fall, whether anyone calculated it or not, on your calendar, in your mailbox, at your table. When this fall finally breaks the household that has been holding on all year, there will be no rescue check waiting on the other side, because the government's own fiscal watchdog has already put it in writing that the country can no longer afford to do what it did in 2008 and 2020. And the only plan left is austerity. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you have probably been holding on to the same quiet assumption almost everyone holds, that if this fall genuinely turns into a catastrophe, the government will do what it has always done. Step in, write the checks, send the relief, absorb the shock so families do not have to face it alone. Let that assumption go, because it has already been formally retired by the one institution whose entire job is to plan for this exact scenario. In a paper titled Break Glass, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a nonpartisan watchdog staffed by former Congressional Budget Office directors from both parties, opened with a sentence that should have been front-page news and instead vanished into a PDF, stating that the United States has never faced an economic shock as indebted as it is today. Never. During the 2008 crisis, the government deployed roughly $1.8 trillion in stimulus and bailouts, and it worked partly because the debt-to-GDP ratio was around 64%, low enough that markets absorbed the borrowing. During the pandemic, it spent roughly $5 trillion at a ratio near 100%, and it still worked. That ratio now sits above 120%, the highest sustained level in the nation's history, with annual interest payments on the debt having crossed $1 trillion for the first time ever, now consuming more than the entire defense budget. And the CRFB states plainly that a shock arriving on top of this debt renders the historical playbook unusable, because you cannot borrow another $5 trillion when you already owe $39 trillion, and the interest alone eats $1 trillion a year, without triggering the bond market panic that turns a recession into a debt spiral. So the watchdog laid out in writing what the actual emergency response would be instead. Freezing Social Security cost of living adjustments. Freezing Medicare. Freezing SNAP. Freezing discretionary spending. Raising taxes. An emergency deficit surtax. Every item on that list is a cut, a freeze, or a tax hike, landing on the same households already being crushed by everything else in this video at the exact moment they need help most. So when the fall convergence finally breaks the family that has been holding the line all year, understand what is waiting on the other side of that breaking point. Not a stimulus check, not a relief package, not a rescue. Austerity, delivered to a population that has already been drained to the bone by a government that has quietly told itself in an official document nobody read, that this time there is nothing left to give. I am not going to close this video by handing you 3 easy tips to survive the fall, because nothing you are about to live through was a problem you created, and no checklist fixes a calendar engineered to empty your account from 6 directions at once. I am closing it by telling you the one thing nobody else will say out loud. For the length of this entire video, I have shown you dates, not opinions, not predictions pulled from thin air, but scheduled events, each one drawn from the government's own agencies, from KFF and Brookings and the Congressional Budget Office and the Department of Education's own collection notices, and every single one of them independently lands in the same narrow stretch of autumn weeks. The student loan garnishments escalating through October, the health premiums doubling on November 1st, the heating assistance delayed or gone as the cold sets in, the food benefits stripped from millions as Thanksgiving arrives, the layoff round timed to the fourth quarter, and the hiring freeze that follows it. The credit card debt detonating across the holidays. The grocery bill spiking into its peak demand window on a broken harvest. And behind all of it, a government that has already admitted, in writing, that there is no rescue coming this time. I am not telling you this so you will panic, and I am not telling you this to sell you a survival kit or a gold coin or a three-step plan that pretends a checklist can undo a convergence this large. I am telling you this for one reason only. You have spent this entire year feeling a specific kind of dread that nobody around you seems willing to name out loud, wondering if you are the only one who senses that the ground is shifting underneath ordinary life, wondering if you are simply too anxious or too negative to see the good news everyone else claims to be finding. You are not too anxious. You are right. The dread was never irrational. It was early. Every institution I cited in this video, none of them with any incentive to frighten you, has quietly confirmed that the floor beneath the American household is scheduled to give way this fall on a timeline that has already been printed, in a convergence that has already been set in motion by people who will personally feel none of it the way you and your family will. I will not lie to you and pretend there is a clean escape from a fall like the one that is coming. I am simply telling you the truth, plainly, before it arrives, so that when it does not arrive disguised as a surprise, and so that you know, whatever happens next, that you saw it clearly, and you were never the one who was crazy.